29. The wretched birds, happy and chattering, fly over the house of dream. It was there that I was content, when once I lived, there where I pressed pen to paper and evoked my dreams with poetry and prose. The shuttered windows of the age-old walls kept out the light of modern day, and when my hand smoothed the fine antique wood with which my furniture was composed, I could touch the past. I breathed in uncommon air, shadow-tainted and fragrant with forgotten things that I could touch and taste. When I closed my eyes I could journey where I would, to temple groves where interlaced boughs conjured shadows through which to drift, along cool paths where vague forms watched and waited. Within my mind I could hear the last song of youth, and sense the wind upon the waters, beneath which an alien thing, crowned like Medusa, called my name. Winged beings that were not the wretched happy birds would rove through dark air, accompanied by the peals that shuddered forth from elder towers, and together these sounds would coax remembered song from mortal mouth. But phantoms have no mouths with which to sing, and spectres do not sleep or dream. We walk the wind through a realm of nothingness, dismembered shadows without form or feeling, wanting so to taste, just once again, the dreaming that belongs to they still living. I followed the heartbeat of my vision, out of raw reality and into another place beyond the rim of time and space. The plastic city of mortality crumbled behind me, a lifeless memory, and there spread before me mists of light that clothed an elder realm, a town where centuried roofs huddled beneath golden sunset beams. This was a locality where I could catch exhausted exhalation and drink with lungs a senescent elixir of unearthly mist, where the shadows of my eyes, no longer writhing in agony at the sight of neoteric glare, could blend with deeper darkness. I stood upon a hill, from which one was rewarded with a panorama of a sunset city where ancient houses crowded centuried lanes, where wraiths of shimmering radiance played among the Georgian steeples of slumbering oratories in which pilgrims uttered prayers. Oh, how I longed to articulate such rare language, to chant to elder gods, but I had no tongue with which to pronounce such benedictions, and my only vocal sounds were hateful hiss and moronic moan. Thus I backed away from the edge of the hill on which I stood and looked, following the path of sod that took me out to the lane that led me to another kind of sacred house, the residence in which my god of fiction had penned his poetry and prose. It rose before me, the grey Victorian house which I had seen in waking, but to behold it here in dream was an added enchantment, for this was a domain in which time and space did not exist, and I knew that the house would still be standing here, enshrouded with the orange and amber rays of sunset, when man's little world was naught but a burned-out cinder, for dreams can never die. I saw that the door of the lower room, where he had lived and worked, was open, and I could feel the keen imaginative lure coax me to it. But I did not need to enter its confines in order to drink the rich elixir of imagination and art, because that art was its own entity, existing in the mundane world of mortality as well as in this realm. His weird fiction was devoured by eyes of flesh, was spoken by mouths of human tissue. It tainted the minds of women and men, and sank them into a void of such fantasy as they had never known. It brought them here, to the place where I stood, beguiled. I shut my phantom eyes and remembered his work, as encroaching twilight darkened the abyss above me. I entered a dream within a dream, wherein 6 strange stars winked awake as they clustered around a sallow moon. As I pierced that gulf of night with my eye-beams, I saw a portion of its gloom drift to the place before me, where there was no longer a house of wood, but rather a site of nameless ritual where 7 pillars tilted over an altar, around which 6 shadow figures stood. The essence of my dreaming self sifted through dark ether toward the altar, and soon I was reclined upon its smooth and chilly stone. One of the figures, hooded and obscure, was taller than the others, and it tilted its lean and blurry form to me as it spoke. "Ah, the 7th dreamer! We have awaited thee from dusk to dusk. We require you to join our chorus and bless the alignment of stars, so that their chaos may envelop the time of mortal men. Speak with us the chant that we now teach you." One by one the other apparitions flowed to me, and bent their mouths to mine, and as they whispered into that cavity, my mouth, I felt the fabric of their eldritch language spill beneath my teeth, and seek the tongue I did not own. I made my paltry moan in answer to their prayers, as sorrow stabbed my soul, and slipped as water from my eyes. But then the tall and faceless effigy bent above me, and I saw that it was composed of purest nightmare, black and proud and alien. It was the sublime and dripping eidolon that was one aspect of that genius who was my god of fiction, a phantasm of horror elevated unto the heights of literary art. Ah, how my mouth ached so as to howl orison in honour of this devil now bent over me, but I had no tongue with which to form unholy idiom, and thus I whimpered. "Your agony is a form of prayer," the old one said, with words that issued from him as smoke and ash, that drifted to my mouth and coated my face. I watched as the being lifted one dark hand and reached beneath its hood to a place where it should have worn a mouth, and when that hand emerged from the faceless void, it held a portion of some black tongue that licked the being's palm. That hand dipped into my mouth, and planted the thing of writhing muscle behind my teeth, and I felt the dry rough thing root itself beneath my mouth, a mouth that, now transfigured and bewitched, spoke the prayer of the 7th dreamer, as a strange star formed above us in the haunted place beside the jaundiced moon, a star that began to crawl in assembly with its kindred in honour of our dread Lord. 31. Ashton read the letter over a second time and laughed. How delightful to be insulted! Usually the telegrams that he received concerning the publication of his poems, books that were illustrated with photographs of his outre sculptures, had been empty-headed in their prosaic praise, but this new response was a welcome change. "A friend gave me a copy of your Cthulhu and others in stone, as a Yule gift. You are one sick bastard. God knows from what mental cesspool you dredge your polluted ideas." Laughing again, he crumpled the paper and tossed it into the hearth, and as he bent toward the flame, the amulet worn around his neck swung against his breast. His hands found the cord and pulled the thing over his head, and he held it to the firelight so that he could admire his work, this icon that he had sculpted from dinosaur bone. Gazing at the amorphous object, he whispered to it, "Where do I get my ideas? From outside, and its secret inhabitants." Delicately he pressed one hard edge of bone against his forehead, and moved it so as to inscribe a kind of sign into his skin, and as he did so he imagined that the firelight dimmed a little, although no current assailed the cabin room. Turning his eyes to one dim corner, he admired his newest work, a figurine fashioned from metamorphic rock. It was larger than his usual study in stone, and in the darkness of its corner its wavering silhouette blended easily with other shadow. The longer he studied it, the more it perplexed him, as had its 5 kindred, for its amorphous shape would not keep solid form, but seemed to undulate and reform, suggestively. Like its kindred, its design had not been planned. Rather, it had taken form beneath his tools and hands, revealing its odd self. as he watched with a sense of wonder shining in his captivated eyes. Yes, it had inspired wonder, and subtle fear, for it was a ferocious icon that conveyed a kind of hunger that he could not comprehend. Entranced, he laughed a third time, as he drifted to his feet and stalked toward the statuette. Ashton pressed his hand to the idol's soft stone, and then he took it up with both hands and cuddled it to his chest, where it pressed closer so as to listen to his mortal heartbeat. The poet walked out of the cabin's doorway into twilight, and found the path that took him into the foothills that were his intimate haunt. He climbed until he reached the stretch of land where a low burial mound rose above the grass, and then he stopped and frowned at the dead tree atop that mound, a dendroid corpse that drooped its withered branches to the ground. It annoyed him to see the black woman who leaned against the tree and chiselled into its dead bark with ritual dagger. She turned to him and motioned that he should join her, and thus he reluctantly crept up the mound until he could smell her fragrance as it washed to him on the wind that moved the soft silk of her yellow dress. And he shuddered at how the dead moonlight glimmered on her wet teeth. She saw the figurine that he held to his chest, and cooed, "Ah, the sixth dreamer! Set it in the ring among its fellows while I complete the sign." There was command in her gentle voice, and he yielded to it, falling to his knees next to where the other figurines formed an incomplete circle. What warm emotion he felt as he examined the other creatures of sculpted stone, as if they were familiar cronies who welcomed him as their own. How wonderful to watch their weirdness as it was complemented by the ghastly moon, that awesome disk in the meaningless vortex of night. Ashton heaved his moan into the gathering wind that caught it and took it upward, to the lifeless lunar sphere that grinned down upon the scene. An essence of his moan echoed among the stars. "Rise," a voice instructed, "and help me nourish this elder creature with mortal wound." Weirdly, he was lifted to his feet, which dragged themselves to the sorceress. He watched her remove her dagger's tip from the tree, and studied the emblem that had been engraved upon the bark. And then he watched as the woman showed him her palm, into which she pressed the dagger's blade and etched the arcane symbol into her flesh. The wind blossomed into tempest that caused the woman's long red hair to billow as she floated to him and pressed her wet red hand against his mouth, which drank her acrid blood, the taste of which coiled within his mouth and, rising, taunted his brain with scalding vision. Her mouth, so close to his, breathed alien language into his own, and then her fingers clutched at his hair and smashed his face against the dead tree's husk, which he bathed with blood. Ashton wrapped his arms around the trunk and held steadfastly, as the creature beside him tore his shirt from his body and bit into his back. He felt her alchemical hands knead his flesh. "We welcome the seventh dreamer," she informed him as his flesh shifted and reshaped. Firmly she held his altered form to the moon, and then she planted him in the circle among his kindred, with whom his now liberated limbs moved in dance. As he capered, he could see the shifting of starlight, and hear reverberations from beneath the mound. He saw the centuried tree that moved with them, twitching its branches as they grew thick and dark with resuscitation. He beheld the globes of searing, unearthly colour that flowered on those branches, spheres that resembled 7 mocking suns. He watched them hatch and scorch the atmosphere with fire that burned the woman's face away, revealing her nothingness that was a representation of future time. Spitting laughter, she joined the 7 dreamers in celebration of the old ones who, finding portal, filtered beyond dimensional rim from outside.